Welcome to a Mom's Conversation with Katherine Hayhoe. Welcome to everyone. We're so happy you're here with us today. My name is Ania Camargo. I am a longtime volunteer with Mothers Out Front, and today I have the honor of being the MC for this webinar. If you have any questions at any time, we have a link in the chat that you can submit your question to, and then you'll have the opportunity to vote on the questions you like the most. And I see this is an incredible audience that we have with us tonight. There are almost 400 people here. Thank you so much for being here. We have people from 30 states, moms, grandmoms, probably dads and granddads, my two daughters, and people all the way from Hawaii to Maine and from Minnesota to Texas, red states and blue states, people who have been with Mothers Out Front since it started in 2013, and people who just joined this summer. And then there's probably a bunch of you who don't know a lot about Mothers Out Front, but you are a big fan of Katherine Hayhoe, and that's why you're here tonight. We are so happy that she is here to have this conversation with us. So before introducing Katherine, I would like to share a brief video of Mothers Out Front so that everybody knows a little bit about what we're about.
Mothers Out Front was founded on the conviction that there is no more powerful force for change than women mobilizing to protect their children. How do we do it? We show up in state houses and town halls, on the steps and at the tables. We serve as a constant reminder that decisions made today have consequences for tomorrow. In San Jose, California, we made history with the nation's largest city yet to ban fossil gas infrastructures in virtually all new buildings. In Colorado, we helped keep oil and gas drilling sites far away from homes and schools. In Virginia and New York, we worked to bring electric buses to school districts. In Massachusetts, we centered environmental justice in a groundbreaking climate bill. We know any mother can accomplish these goals. Join us.
Thank you. We get to introduce Katherine. Katherine Hayhoe is an accomplished atmospheric scientist who studies climate change and why it matters to us here and now. She is also a remarkable communicator who has received the American Geophysical Union's Climate Communication Prize, the Stephen Schneider Climate Communication Award, the United Nations Champion of the Earth Award, and has been named to a number of lists, including Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People, Foreign Policy's 100 Leading Thinkers, and Fortune Magazine's World's Greatest Leaders. Her TED Talk, The Most Important Thing You Can Do to Fight Climate Change is Talk About It, has nearly 4 million views, and her most recent book, Saving Us, A Climate Scientist's Case for Hope and Healing in a Divided World, was just published by Simon & Schuster last month. And for kids, an exciting series called Global Weirding that is on YouTube. Katherine serves as Chief Scientist for the Nature Conservancy, and she is also a Paul W. Horn Distinguished Professor and the Political Science Endowed Professor in Public Policy and Public Law at Texas Tech University. Katherine is a mom to a teenage son. So welcome to our conversation, Katherine. I am so excited to talk with you. I've been a big fan since your TED Talk, and I try to practice it in when I have conversations, and I have lots of questions for you. And then we will open up to the audience, if that's okay. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Welcome everybody who's here. And I just wanted to let you know that the way you ask us questions is through the link in the chat, which is pollev.com/Katherine, my name spelled with 2 A's. And you can enter your question at any time, and you can also upvote the questions you most want us to answer. So go to pollev.com, enter Katherine, and that's where you can get your questions. Okay, take it away, Ania.
Thank you so much. All right, so my first question for you is how you got interested in studying climate change.
So that's a good question. And what I did was I was actually interested in studying science. My dad was a science teacher, and so he taught me that the most fascinating thing you could possibly study was science. Of course, it explains how the world works. So I was almost finished an undergraduate degree in astrophysics. Because honestly, what's more amazing than using nothing more than what we understand on this little planet, we can explore the far reaches of the universe. I was almost finished my degree when I needed an extra class. So I looked around and there was a brand new course in climate science that had just been added. And I thought, well, that looks interesting. Why not take it? So I had learned about climate change with other environmental issues like biodiversity loss, air pollution, environmental issues that environmentalists care about, and the rest of us wish them well. Watch their documentaries, support their organizations. That's the way I thought about climate change. But I took that class and it completely shocked me because it showed me that climate change, of course, is an environmental issue, but it's so much more. Climate change directly affects the food that we eat and the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the safety of our homes, our children's future, and climate change is profoundly unfair. It disproportionately affects the poorest and most vulnerable people on the planet, the ones who are already marginalized, the ones who already live in poverty. Those are the ones who are impacted the most right here where I live in Texas, as well as on the other side of the world. So when I found out about this, I thought, I have to do everything I can to help solve this global problem because it's so urgent. Surely we'll fix it soon, and then I can go back to studying galaxies. That was a long time ago.
And you're still working on it.
I am, but we are closer than we were back then.
Well, that's sort of where I want to get to, which is, we're now at a point when it's pretty hard to ignore climate change is happening. The fires in the West, as you were talking, the droughts, what's happening, droughts everywhere, floods all around the world. These storms that are supposed to happen once in 500 years are happening every year. And then this summer, there was a new international panel on climate change report that just was really dire, and it was worse than it ever had been, and calling a code red for humanity. And so I'd love to hear sort of what's in this report, and also how do you think about it, and how do you keep hope?
Exactly. So I am a climate scientist. I study what difference our choices make in our future, and I also study what's happening right here and right now. And I can tell you there is a lot happening right here and right now. It is no longer a future issue. It is affecting all of us no matter where we live. So what's happening? Climate change is loading the weather dice against us. Wherever you live, it's like you have a pair of dice and you always have a chance of rolling a double six. If you live along the coast, it might be a hurricane. If you live out west, it might be a wildfire. If you live in the Midwest, it might be a flood. No matter where you live, you always have a chance of rolling a double six, naturally. So where does climate change come in? Decade by decade, as the world warms, it's as if it's sneaking in and taking one of those numbers and turning it into a 6, and then another number and turning it into a 6. So you roll more 6s. And then it takes one of those numbers and turns it into a 7, and then another 7. And before you know it, you get wildfires that are burning way more area than they ever have. You get hurricanes that are incredibly strong, dropping 50 or more inches of rain. You get unprecedented heat waves like the one they had out west. It was at least 150 times more likely because of climate change. And why do we care about these issues? Because they affect us. They affect the air that we and our children breathe. They affect the safety of our homes. They affect our insurance rates, our food costs. All of these things affect us. So what did the IPCC report that came out this summer say? It said a lot. It was hundreds of pages, but you can boil the whole thing down to 4 simple sentences. Every year counts. Every bit of warming matters. Every action matters, and every choice matters. Why? Because the future is in our hands. It is up to us how much worse it gets. We are the reason why climate is changing today. According to natural factors, it should be slowly, gradually getting a little bit cooler over very long time periods. Instead, we are warming faster than any time in the history of human civilization on this planet, and that's why it matters. It's not about saving the planet. Literally, actually, that's why I called my book Saving Us, because it is about saving us and many of the other living things that share this planet with us. So that's what the science says. It says it's bad, but we can choose our future still. And that's why today is such a critical time to be using our voices to talk about why it matters and what we can all do to help move that giant boulder faster down the hill in the right direction.
So what gives you hope?
Well, interestingly, that's why I wrote the book, because the number one question that I've been getting over the last 5 years literally, is what gives you hope. So that's why I wrote the book, to answer the question of what gives you hope. It isn't a specific politician. It's not a specific bill, even a good one. It's not a specific action or person. It's recognizing that climate action is not a giant boulder at the bottom of a very steep cliff with only a few hands on it or one chance to get it up. When we look around, when we widen our gaze and we look at all of the companies, the cities, the states, the organizations, the schools, the universities, the tribal nations, the churches, when we look at everybody who's acting, we realize that giant boulder of climate action is already at the top of the hill, and it is already rolling down the hill in the right direction. And it already has millions of hands on it. And if we add our hand, and if we persuade our school, our city, our family, our group, our organization to add their hands too, and then they persuade others to add their hands, that boulder gets going faster and faster with every new hand that we add. And that's what gives me hope, is recognizing that the world has changed before. It can change again. And when it did, it was not because a president or a prime minister, I'm from Canada, or a politician or a CEO or a big famous person decided it had to. That wasn't why it changed. It was because very ordinary people decided slavery is wrong. Racial segregation is wrong. Not allowing women to vote is wrong. People decided that is not the way the world should be. And they used the most powerful force they have, which is their voice, to put their hands on that boulder, to get it rolling down the hill, to eventually where politicians had to agree. Presidents had to agree. CEOs of companies had to agree. They had to agree, and they had to let change happen.
Well, I am excited to say that Mothers Out Front is very much with you. We have been trying to grow this movement to do exactly that. And I'm going to get into a little bit later about how do we talk to people who are struggling to get them to join us. But right now, I want to talk about that system level, which is, I mean, I think it takes everyone, right? What you said, it takes from all the way from the countries all the way down to each individual. But at the system level, what kind of progress do you think has been made? And I'm thinking of what's happened in countries and in states, industries, the oil and gas industry. Do you see movement there that you think could potentially have a big impact?
So we know when it comes to this problem that 90 corporations are responsible for 2/3 of carbon emissions since the dawn of the industrial era. 90 corporations. And so often people say, well, how could we change something like that? Obviously, we can't make a difference. We need system-wide change, and we do. But what's a system made up of? People. A system is made up of people. Companies have people inside them. Companies have shareholders outside them. Companies have consumers. Companies have banks that finance them. All of us are part of this system. And how we engage in this system is by using our voices. So what's already happened in terms of system-wide change? Well, last year during COVID, 90% of new energy installed around the world was clean energy. 90%. I live in the state of Texas, which is well known for its oil and gas industry. We get 23% of our electricity from wind and solar energy. The city of Houston has a climate action plan and Paris targets. The city of Dallas has a climate action plan, as does Austin and San Antonio. If we can see change happening in Texas, we can see it happening anywhere. So ironically, living in Texas gives me hope.
That's terrific. Okay, so let's talk about our federal government for a minute, which is right now they're struggling to pass this stimulus bill. And the big wicket that they're struggling with is Joe Manchin basically saying that the climate piece has to come out.
Mm-hmm.
He is hugely funded by the oil and gas industry. And so I'm wondering sort of how you think we can whether we should be doing actions at the federal level, or do we maybe transition and start thinking about doing more work in our own states and our own communities?
The answer to your question is yes. That means we need to do everything. at every level. So often, I think that we assume that the federal government will take care of it. And the federal government has a huge responsibility to do so. But it's not only their responsibility, because when you look at all of our cities, all of our states, all of our corporations, they have a huge impact, both in terms of their individual footprint, so to speak, like their direct emissions, but even more in terms of their shadow, the influence that they cast within their sector, across the region, and around the world. So we are seeing a difficult time right now in US politics, where potentially the most important piece of climate legislation in a decade is being held up by someone who has significant coal interests. It's not even oil and gas, it's coal. Coal has been in a free fall in the United States for the last 30 years, not because of climate legislation. It's simply because it is expensive, it's dirty, and it's inefficient. We've been using coal for a very long time, and coal has brought us a lot of benefits. But now it's time to say thank you and time to move on from coal. But we need to be sure that we're investing in those communities where that's the only source of people's livelihoods. There are so many people in that industry who are not the CEOs making the big dollars. They're just people who want to feed their families, and that is the only option they have if they want to live where their own parents lived. That's the only industry in town. So that's what's called the just transition. And that's why it's so important to look at policies, for example, that put a price on carbon, because then you can use the revenues to look after people in lower income brackets who might be affected by changes in the price of fuel, look after people who live in communities that don't have any other options, and say, how could we attract a new manufacturing plant to that area? How could we offer retraining for people? How could we guarantee a job for anyone who wants a job to feed their families in those regions? That's what the future looks like. So digging in our heels at this point and doubling down on our investment in horses and buggies, when Henry Ford is already turning out the Model T Ford, is not a smart forward-thinking action. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing today with coal. Coal has already been in decline due to natural gas being cheaper and cleaner. Natural gas, not climate legislation. And now is the time to recognize that while those industries brought those regions some benefits in the past, as well as polluting much of their water and their air too, they brought jobs in the past, they need new jobs. Let's figure out a way to get new jobs into those areas.
Yes, totally agree with you. So I'm going to transition now a little bit to you. You are an incredible communicator, and you could probably talk to absolutely anyone and get them on your side. So many of us are out there working in our communities, and there's three audiences that I'm interested in how you talk to. One is children. There's a study a survey, 10,000 people, I think between ages 15 and 25 or something, have extreme climate anxiety. So that's one audience. Like, how do you talk to kids so that they have hope and want to engage? The second audience that I'm interested in is the people who know all about climate change, but it's just not a priority. It's, it's a big deal, but it's not what I care about. And then the third audience is the audience that doesn't believe and doesn't really want to engage.
All right, so let's start with them and work backwards. So people who are dismissives are people who are absolutely convinced that it is a hoax, and they will dismiss what 200 years of science tells us. That's how long we've known about this. They will dismiss what 2,000 climate scientists tell them, and they will dismiss what 2 million climate science studies tell them. Yeah, we have more than 2 million actually today. My personal definition of a dismissive is if an angel from God with brand new tablets of stone that say global warming is real appeared to them, they would reject that. So why would I expect that I can change their mind? I don't think I can. I have actually tried quite a few times, hundreds of times, because I'm a scientist, so I like to collect my own data points. And I can tell you conclusively that it is a very small percentage chance, about 0.1%, that you can ever convince a dismissive. And when you do, you might not even know why. Someone wrote me once and they said, I have to confess that you dragged my sorry ass to the truth. I used to be dismissive and I didn't even know how I'd done it. But here's the thing, although they are the loudest voices, We see them all the time on social media, especially on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, not so much on Instagram. People are a lot friendlier there. We hear about them in the news. We hear about politicians and pundits. Those dismissives are only 7% of the population. 7%. So with the 7%ers, if they confront me in a public place, I say, that's not true, and I move on. But if they're in our life, I just say, you know what? I'm going to talk to 93%. The 93% of us most of us are actually worried. 70% of us are already worried about climate change, more if we're young people. But we have two problems. And now that gets the next two groups. The groups of people who say, sure, it's real, but who cares? And then people who are really, really anxious, which include many of our children and young people. Most of us have one of two problems, or both, actually. We don't think it matters to us here and now in ways that are relevant to us. We agree it will affect people in the future, not now. We agree it will affect people who live in low-income countries over there, not here. We agree it will affect plants and animals, non-human species, not us. And when you ask people in the US, do you think it affects me? All of a sudden the numbers plummet. We don't think it affects us. That's problem number one. What's problem number two? We don't think there's any viable way to fix it without destroying the economy, taking away people's personal liberties. And we're told this by people. People are literally spreading false information like President Biden will take away your meat, or Bernie Sanders wants to abort all the babies. I have literally heard these messages. And what they're doing is they're fostering solution aversion. We, all of us, even many of us who are totally convinced of the science, who live in high income countries, we feel that climate solutions will take away our lifestyle, our comfort, things we hold dear. And people tell us the only way that you can show that you care about climate is you have to stop. Stop what? Stop everything. You have to definitely stop having babies. Somebody said that on my LinkedIn page today. You have to stop driving. You have to stop flying. You have to stop using electricity. You have to stop eating meat. You have to stop everything. Now, don't get me wrong. We certainly consume way more than we need to. And there are much better ways to live mindfully and intelligently in terms of our travel, our homes, our diet. All of those do make a difference. And I've made changes in my personal life too. But my personal carbon footprint is this big. Our carbon shadow can be enormous through our influence on others when we talk about why it matters and what we can do to fix it. So with people who say it doesn't matter, I start asking them questions. What do you care about? Are you a parent? Do you care about your kids? Where do you live? What do you enjoy doing? What do you love? What are you concerned about? 99 times out of 100, within 5 minutes of just having a conversation with somebody, and I have lots of examples in my book about this, you can connect the dots to how climate change affects what they already care about. Whether it's food or wine or tennis or diving, whether it's if they live in Arizona, if they live in Maine, if they live in Chicago. Whoever we are, whatever we care about, climate change is already affecting us. That's the bad news. But the good news is that means that everybody already has a reason to care. And our job is not to convince them to care for the same reason we do. That's not our job. Our job is to figure out what reason they already have to care. And then we need to talk about practical, positive solutions that they can help out with to get their hand on the boulder. And that's where our anxiety comes in. When we are anxious, when we are afraid, when we are paralyzed by this issue, it's because we don't think we can fix it. And if we don't think we can fix it, we won't. What will doom us is our own fear. And now don't get me wrong, it's bad. It is bad. I'm a scientist. I look at this all the time. It's bad. But I know that we have a choice. I know the future will look different depending on the choices that we make. And so in our Global Weirding series, which Bamina put in the chat there, globalweirdingseries.com, the most watched video out of all 30 of them is, I'm just a kid, what can I do? Because often kids feel like I'm just, 7 or 9 or 12 or 13, what can I do? Turns out kids are amazing. Kids are putting adults to shame. Kids are inventing algae biofuel in experiments they build under their bed and winning national science fairs. Kids are suing the federal government for their right to a better future, not just in the US, but in Germany and Canada and other countries. Kids are out there with signs going on strike for climate. Kids are absolutely amazing. So in making that short little video, I was only able to share like a 1% of all the amazing stories of what kids are doing. So when we show our kids that it's real, but we can do something about it and figure out something you can do with your kids. Sometimes they figure it out themselves. They don't even need us. That's where our hope comes from. As Greta Thunberg says, she says, there's one thing we need more than hope, and it's action. But when we act, hope is all around us.
Yep, absolutely. So that sort of brings me to Mothers Up Front. So Mothers Up Front does have teams across the country and working on climate change. In Massachusetts, we're trying to transition the gas system to renewable thermal. And we have 3 moms from Mothers Up Front who are going to share what they're up to. So I'm going to have Katie from Virginia share what's going on in Virginia. Here we go.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie Henderson. I live in Fairfax County in Northern Virginia. I've been with the group since 2020, which has been a little bit weird joining a group like this during COVID, but it's been amazing. We focus on electric school buses. So we have an electric school bus campaign going on. You know, we feel really strongly about this nationwide. 24 million school children travel in 480,000 school buses. You know, there are only 140,000 public transit buses in the country. So this is a huge deal. You know, converting school buses from diesel to electric addresses the carbon footprint. A lot of people talk about this as kind of the most extensive mass transit system in the country. You know, as moms, we've got a really unique place in this conversation. Studies have shown that children inside of the buses are exposed to at least 5 times the level of pollution and contaminants as outside of the bus. You know, this is something obviously we care very strongly about. We have a very strong voice on this, and it's a big climate issue. So our team has built a really strong relationship with a state delegate from our area, Mark Keem. He's been championing this cause the last couple years in our state. And in 2020, he introduced legislation that our team helped draft, basically trying to establish a state level grant fund for school systems to apply for monies to fund electric school buses. You know, the one big part of this that we were really adamant about is that it will prioritize communities with the worst air quality, highest asthma rates, and oldest buses. It also mandates a stakeholder group be formed to advise the state Department of Environmental Quality, who's going to be running the program. And that will really give a voice to stakeholders to make sure that anything they develop centers equity and make sure we have an equitable rollout of buses in the state. So it was kind of a, you know, roller coaster during the state session. Our electric utility had introduced a rival bill, and kind of the whole environmental community was ready to sort of give up on this because they thought it wasn't going to be able to separate out a state grant fund versus the electric utility program. You know, it's a big equity issue for the utility program. You know, at face level, it was great, more buses, but it was going to have it was ratepayer funded. So the people with the highest energy burden, meaning people who have, you know, pay the greatest percentage of their income towards electricity costs, they were going to bear the brunt of the utility program. So anyways, everybody was kind of ready to give up on it and oppose anything because they didn't think it could be separated out. And, you know, we really stuck to it and, you know, used our voices as moms and the pollution issue and everything. And we were so excited that it actually was separated out. and a state grant fund in Virginia has been established. So this is a huge success for us. We are very excited.
Congratulations, that's terrific. I'm so happy to hear that story. I think we need to bring that to Massachusetts. So that's wonderful. So that's Virginia, which, and we have a story also from New York. So Billy.
Hi, I'm Billy Roberti. I'm a volunteer with the Mothers Out Front Long Island team in New York, and we are located in the town of Huntington. Our team was formed in 2017, and our first campaign was to have our town pass a Sierra Club Ready for 100 resolution. This was an initiative for communities all over the US to commit to achieving 100% renewable energy. So we set about our campaign. First, we prepared the resolution. Then we presented it for feedback to our town's advisory committee on energy efficiency, renewables, and sustainability. I happen to belong to this committee. We got their feedback and we made some changes to the resolution. And then we met one-to-one with each town council person to discuss the resolution and receive support. The team found it very empowering to talk with people in power. Then we held a community meeting about the resolution at the public library to get community support. And we encouraged moms and dads and anybody who was interested to show up at the town hall meeting. It ended up being July of 2018 when the resolution was voted on, and it passed. But there was a hitch. There was a last minute changes made to the resolution so that instead of committing to the Sierra Club's Ready for 100 initiative, the town committed to earning a Climate Smart Communities certification. Climate Smart Communities is a program jointly sponsored by several New York State agencies. The town was already registered as a climate smart community, but hadn't done anything. Our resolution spurred the town to work on achieving a bronze certification by taking actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to changing climate using the free technical assistance and grants through this program. The moral of my story is sometimes you don't get what you ask for. You get something better.
That's awesome. Thank you, Billy. We have one more example of a team in Colorado. So Velma, if you would share what's going on in Colorado, that would be great.
Hi, everybody, and it's delightful to be here with this group and share our enthusiasms. Here in Pueblo, Colorado, we're a relatively new Mothers Up Front team. We were introduced to the organization first by Stephanie Bowman, who was our Colorado organizer at that time. And then later our team building progressed with Jamie Valdez, a longtime community activist here, who is now our community organizer. We're an environmental justice community, having a high percentage, if not a majority, Latinx population. We have low income, many polluting industries, and higher than the state average rates of asthma, COPD, and heart disease. We're burdened with any number of the social justice and economic issues that face many environmental justice communities in this country. We chose air quality as a general theme for our organizing, and because there were a variety of actions that we could follow under that. We have a coal-fired power plant here in town that is the greatest emitter of greenhouse gases in the state and emits about 80% of the toxic air pollutants in our community. So we've been working to reduce those impacts on the whole community with partner organizations to get that plant closed. Our goal is by 2030, if not sooner. In addition, our county commissioners shocked all of us by having closed door meetings to propose replacing this coal-fired pollutant with an even worse situation by proposing a nuclear power plant replace the coal-fired power plant. So Mothers Out Front organized and has been leading the opposition, local and statewide, to replacing coal with nuclear. And we have actions planned as soon as this weekend. Another thing we discovered was a need for data to increase the community's control of our own environmental quality. In our community, in spite of the air pollution and other factors I mentioned, there were few, if any, air quality monitors. So whenever we brought issues to people's attention, we were told, oh, there's no data, there's no indication. Well, if you don't look, you're not going to find anything. So we've been working with other groups and with our state health department to get grants to put publicly directed as well as publicly available air quality, air pollution monitors in our community as well as other environmental justice communities. We've been identifying needs in schools such as air conditioning, and our climate is very hot and getting hotter. And the schools, even before climate impacts, were not adequately air conditioned for the hot weather. We're looking at renewable energy in our schools and electric buses. And finally, we've been building relationships with other parts of our community through tabling at events such as anti-colonial, indigenous support protests for removal of a Columbus statue, Pride Fest, and our recent multicultural event where we met a whole lot of people really interested in Mothers Out Front and what we're all about.
Thank you so much, Velma. And I don't know if you guys can hear, but there's like a fire alarm in my house going on.
Oh, no.
So now just going back to our conversation, Katherine. Thank you all so much for sharing. Obviously, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on everywhere with Mothers Out Front, and but I'm going to now move us to a final question before we open it up for the audience, which is that I am so excited to read your new book, Saving Us, A Climate Scientist's Case for Hope. Now, you told us a little bit about the hope part. Then you're talking about the second piece of it is healing in a divided world. And this is sort of where we get into sort of red states, blue states, and we get into religion and all of that. And I see that one of the questions that's popping up a lot is about religion. And so I'm wondering if you could touch on all of that. And how do you do it in your book? Like, is that part of it?
Yes, I can definitely touch on that. And we have a ton of great questions already here with a lot of upvotes. So climate change is the #1 most politicized issue in the United States. And it has been that way since the Obama administration. COVID is right up there. Racial justice is right up there. But climate change continues to dominate as the most polarized issue, which means that the #1 predictor of whether we agree it's real, it's serious, and we need to act is not how educated we are, how smart we are, how much science we know. It is simply where we fall on the political spectrum. So here's where the healing comes in. If we can figure out how to come together on the most contentious issue in the country, couldn't we come together on other things too? And often that has to begin, though, by recognizing the real problem. So often people cover their objections with smoke screens, 2 types of smoke screens. The first type is sciencey sounding smoke screens. It's just a natural cycle. It's just the sun. Volcanoes produce more pollution than humans. It's interesting how none of these sciencey sounding smoke screens existed before about 20 years ago. Climate change was not politically polarized in the 1990s. When did it become polarized? When the impacts became so obvious that it was clear that action was needed. That's when people began to create sciencey sounding objections, which I put the E on there not to be cute, but it's because when you go to the science, they don't have a leg to stand on. Natural cycles just move heat around the Earth system. They don't warm the entire planet. That would violate conservation of energy, a basic law of physics. One volcanic eruption doesn't produce more CO2 pollution than humans. All geologic activity on the entire planet put together produces as much CO2 as 3 medium-sized US states. And what about the sun? The sun's energy has been going down the last 50 years, not up. So it can't be the sun causing us to warm either. But there's a second category of smoke screens people use too. And these are religious-y sounding smoke screens. And this relates directly to question number 1. Where does the climate change denial among many professing Christians come from? And thank you for the second part of your question, because I appreciate the nuance there. Why is it that so many Christian faith leaders in the United States align themselves with the petroleum and the fossil fuel industry? So when they surveyed people in the United States a few years ago, and they asked them how worried they were about climate change, and they divided their answers out by religious denomination, they found that the most concerned people group in the country were Hispanic Catholics. And you might say, well, of course, the Pope wrote a whole encyclical about climate change and about how serious a problem it is, and how if you take the Christian faith seriously, you would be out at the front of the line demanding climate action. The Pope, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the Patriarch of the Orthodox Church just released a letter a couple of weeks ago calling for significant action at the COP climate conference in Glasgow. So you'd say, well, of course, that's why they care. But then you go all the way to the very bottom. Who is the least concerned about climate change? On that survey, white Catholics beat out white evangelical Protestants by 1 percentage point. And you might say, okay, hang on a second. Hispanic Catholics, white Catholics, same Pope, same Bible, same denomination. What's causing this denial? It is not what the Bible says or doesn't say. It is political ideology with some religiously sounding window dressing on it. Because when you look at these religiously sounding objections, they have as much of a leg to stand on as the sciencey sounding ones, which is to say none. People say, well, God's in control, so it doesn't matter what we do to this planet. You open the Bible to book 1, chapter 1, and it says God gave humans responsibility over every living thing on this planet. You go to the end of the Bible, it says God will destroy those who destroy the earth. And then in between, you've got a lot more positive things about how every little tiny bit of nature is important, and how we are to care for and love those who are less fortunate than us, the very people most affected by climate change. So if we take our faith seriously, and I'm speaking from a Christian perspective, but if you look at any other major religious tradition in the whole world, every single one of them has some aspect of stewardship of nature in it, some aspect of caring for those less fortunate. And many colleagues of mine who are humanists say, well, I care about climate change because it affects people and it's not fair. We don't even have to be any type of faith to recognize that climate change is a justice issue. But if we are, we would be at the front of the line demanding action because it is consistent with what we believe. And that is what is happening outside the US. The Secretary General of the World Evangelical Alliance was so concerned about climate change that he was a delegate for his country, the Philippines, to the Paris Climate Conference. I mentioned earlier the Pope, the Patriarch, and the Archbishop of Canterbury. Even in the US, there are organizations like the Catholic Climate Covenant. There are organizations like Young Evangelicals for Climate Action who are advocating for clean energy standards all around the whole country and picketing outside the White House. So there definitely are people who are living out their faith. But over the history of the United States, beginning with the American Revolution, but really kicking into high gear in the 1980s, there have been very intelligent and very deliberate and very successful attempts in the United States to conflate right-wing ideology with conservative theology. Those attempts have been so successful today that for many people, their statement of faith is written by their political ideology first, and only by the theology a distant second. And if the two come into conflict, they will go with politics over their theology. That's the problem that we have today. And so we can't fall prey to those smokescreens. We have to understand people don't really have a problem with 200 years of physics. And whatever religion people are, that religion calls for them to care for nature, creation, and other people. What's the real problem? We don't think it matters, and we don't think there's any way to fix it. So we have to cut right to the chase and tackle those two issues to change anybody's hearts.
Yes, totally agree with you. All right, well, so we have sort of a similar question. If you see it, your top questions. Number 7 is about the language we use, and things like code red on a beautiful blue sky day, maybe not working so much, or people not sort of feeling it. And then we get environmentalists get labeled as extremists and
Mhm.
out there. So can you talk a little bit about the language we should be using that is going to help us get to where we want to be?
Yes, I will. And actually, just referring to the chat, Christine had an excellent comment in the chat that many Hispanic Catholics in the United States come from or still have family members and friends in countries that are being disproportionately affected by climate change. So there's a much more direct connection to understanding how they're being directly affected. And thank you for mentioning that, Christine. So language. I often get people asking me, what's the right word? If I just use the right word, surely it will convince people. I have a bit of an inside track there because my husband is an applied linguist. And he says, there is no right word because whatever word works for you is the right word. So I have even, and I talk about this in my book, it's quite a funny story. I have even given entire presentations where I talk about observed trends and future projections and mitigation and adaptation, entire presentations with never mentioning the words climate and change together, because I knew that they were trigger words for my audience. I knew if I said them, they would turn off. But if I talk about changes in temperature and rainfall and resilience and drought and planning, they would listen. And they did. And I won't tell you the punchline. There's a very funny punchline in the book, but I'll leave that for you. For some people, we need to wake up. It is a crisis. I mean, it is a crisis. And for some people, calling it a crisis or code red, especially for world governments, they need that language. But for other people who don't know what to do, who feel no agency, no efficacy, no sense of empowerment, when you tell them it's even worse than they thought, they just want to pull the blankets up over their head and go back to bed, so to speak. I get that feeling myself some days. So what we call it really depends on who we're talking to. And often I like to call it, and again, this is not a perfect phrase, but I like to call it global weirding, because things are just getting weird where we live. And often our lived experience shows us that things are kind of strange. You know, seasons, I was sitting outside today, near the end of October, it was so hot, I was sweating. And then you get crazy winter storms, you get wildfires out of control, you get massive hurricanes, things are just getting weird, and that's what we experience. There is no magic word, but we do know that pouring out all of the doom and gloom without offering positive, constructive solutions causes us to freeze. We need action, and that's why Moms Out Front is so important, because you just heard those amazing stories, right? We can make a difference. Individual people using our voice to gather together with others to advocate for changes in our community, we can make a difference. And action is what gives us hope. So the doom and fear-filled messages can activate us so we realize there is a problem. But once we realize there's a problem, we need to know what to do about it. And if we don't know what to do about it, we will do nothing.
Yep. I think we're all energized now with what you're telling us. We're ready to do things. But we have a couple more questions that I'd love to get to. Again, top one, if whether you support the Green New Deal. That has a lot of things you're talking about, particularly around jobs, which are so important.
It does. And I would say just very briefly, as a non-US citizen, I am Canadian, if you can't tell by the way I talk. I don't officially support any policies, but I would say that the Green New Deal has many aspects to it that is what I'm talking about. Climate change is not only an environmental issue. Climate change is a health issue. Climate change is a justice issue. Climate change is an everything issue, and most of all, climate change is a human issue. And so climate solutions need to be justice solutions, they need to be health solutions, they need to be human solutions. Those are the types of solutions we need.
There's an international question here in terms of what's happening in Africa, and it also sort of, we didn't touch on what's going to happen at the summit in Glasgow, but I wonder whether we can leave the United States for a little bit and talk about the rest of the world.
We can.
Yeah, so the
Yes.
question here is about Africa, but if you could maybe touch with that and then also just talk about what your hopes are for Glasgow, that would be great.
Oh, sure. Okay. So the question's a little bit different. Let me talk about climate impacts first, and then I'll answer the question directly. And I'll read it so everybody knows which one it is. So it turns out that the countries who are most responsible for fossil fuel emissions are the countries that do not bear the brunt of the impacts. The 3.5 billion poorest people in the world have produced 7% of global emissions. 7%. Yet when we look at which countries are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, it is the countries where the most people live below the poverty line, where the least people have access to clean water or basic sanitation, where often there's hunger issues. Those are the countries where people are suffering the impacts the most. So as we go to the Glasgow Climate Conference, the high income countries are going there to compare what they're all bringing to the global potluck in terms of their carbon emission reductions. They're going to see, okay, here comes the United States with a big apple pie. They put it on the table, you cut into it. What if it's full of hot air? It might be. Another country shows up with an old freezer burned fish finger they dragged out of the back of the fridge. Then another country like Costa Rica shows up with a giant fresh salad with homemade dressing. Countries are bringing very different dishes to the global potluck. And this meeting is a chance to see who's bringing what and who needs to up their game. But then you've got the low income countries that have produced almost nothing. Their contribution to the mitigation potluck, their fair share of the contribution, is literally a sprig of mint or some toothpicks, because they have contributed nothing to the problem. So they only have to bring a solution proportion to their contribution. Instead, they are there to say, how can we adapt? How can we build resilience? And this is the question, how can we continue to develop? Because the greatest correlation between energy and human well-being is with electricity. Electricity provides access to light so children can study at night, so women can walk safely outside in more areas, so that we can use appliances to do some of our work for us. Electricity is the number one thing most correlated with human well-being. So then people say, how dare we say to poor countries that they can't use the same fossil fuel resources we use? That's not fair, right? Hang on a second. Why have they not used the same fossil fuel resources we have? They don't have them. Most low-income countries do not have massive fossil fuel resources, and the few that do, they are being extracted by multinational corporations that take those fossil fuels out of the country, enrich a very few people in that country, and leave behind a devastating trail of pollution that affect children, the unborn, maternal health, all kinds of impacts. So what do those countries have? They have a lot of sun and they have a lot of wind. And they don't have to buy those from any other country. Because when you say, here, let me help you build a coal-fired power plant, you know what you're doing? You're saying, here, you can buy coal from us for the next 40 years. But when you say, here, let us help you build a wind farm and build hydropower and build storage, because the wind doesn't always blow, you are not saying that they then have to buy the wind from you for the next 40 years. And so that's why last year during COVID, 90% of new energy installed around the world was clean energy. It's not perfect, and many low-income countries are still going to have to rely on some natural gas to get kickstarted. But the world is changing, and what's going to be discussed in Glasgow is how the wealthier countries that have the greater part of the responsibility can help the lower income countries continue to develop through technology transfer, through joint adaptation and mitigation programs that build resilience while helping them to reduce carbon emissions, because that's the right thing to do and that's the fair thing to do.
Wow, thank you so much. I totally agree. Let's hope that starts to happen. I'm wondering if we have time for one more question that is brief before we close. And I think you touched a little bit on greenhouse gas on pricing. Looks like there's a carbon pricing question. Shouldn't we put a price on greenhouse gas emissions measured in terms of their carbon dioxide equivalent rather than just pricing carbon?
That's a great question. That's a bit technical. So I'll just say, yes, we could put a price on all greenhouse gas emissions, and some countries are certainly moving in that direction. Carbon is the biggest part of it, but there are other gases that it makes sense to reduce too. Methane from landfills and from leaking oil wells. Oh my goodness, that should definitely be eliminated. Methane is much more powerful short term. But if you don't mind, I'm just going to do a super quick round through 2 key questions I see here in this list. These questions are
go for
awesome.
it.
There's so many good ones. Okay.
Go for it.
What can you introduce and respond to data that people say it's too late? Okay, is it too late? Yes and no. Some impacts are already here today. They're already here today. So obviously it's too late to avoid those. But I am a scientist who studies the future, and I can tell you, this is directly from the horse's mouth here. I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that there is a world of difference between a future where we depend entirely on fossil fuels versus a future where we transition as soon as possible to clean energy. You know what the difference is? The fate of civilization as we know it. That is what hangs in the balance today, and it is not too late to not save the planet, to save us. The planet will still be orbiting the sun long after we're gone. The question is, will we? That choice is up to us, and it is not too late to make that choice. To put it a different way, it's as if we've been smoking a pack of cigarettes a day for years and even decades. We have some impaired lung capacity. We might even have some spots on our lungs, but we do not have emphysema, we do not have lung cancer, and we're not dead yet. So when's the right time to act? Now. By how much? As much as we can. Because the quicker we cut our emissions, the better off we will all be. Every year matters, every bit of warming matters. And so let's end with this one, if you don't mind. I love this question. Tell us one actionable item we can do to get started to make a change. It is so easy to feel overwhelmed. I don't even know where to start. Well, this is exactly why I wrote my book. Because what the book says is this: the number one thing, and my TED Talk says this too, actually. So if you don't mind putting a link to my TED Talk in the chat again, my TED Talk is about this and you can watch it immediately for free. There is one thing that every single one of us can do that is the most powerful thing we can all do. It is using our voice. Using our voice to not dump a whole load of scary sounding facts on people. Using our voice to talk about why it matters and what we can do together to fix it, again, which is what Mothers Out Front is all about, is the single most important thing everybody can do, because we cast a long shadow. When we have that conversation at our kids' school, at our place of work, with our neighbor, at our community organization, at our social group, at our church, wherever we are, we can use our voice. And we can definitely call our elected officials too, not just at the federal level, the state level, the city level. They make a lot of decisions too. Using our voice is how the world has changed before. Because when you look at how did slavery end? How did women get the vote? How was civil rights enacted? How did apartheid end? It wasn't because a president woke up one morning and decided that it had to change. It was because very ordinary people who were not particularly powerful or wealthy or influential, they decided that the world could and should be different, and they used their voices. Every single one of us can do that. So have a conversation and watch my TED Talk. If you can't find it, just Google Katherine Hayhoe and TED Talk, and it'll tell you how to do it. And I have tons of amazing stories in the book that talk about conversations that have changed cities, that have changed schools, that have changed entire minds. It works.
Awesome. So we are so looking forward to it. I see that it's 8 o'clock, and I still want to say 3 things to people because I want people to join Mothers Out Front. And so I'm wondering, Bimina, if you can put up the slide very quickly. Thank you. So the first thing is to support our movement of moms. You can join us on social media. You can find us on the internet. We have a Facebook, Instagram. You can make a donation. And if you can go on to the next page, Bimina, putting on my public radio kind of hat. We have an incredible announcement, which is that right now until the end of October, if you donate to us, we're a member-led organization. And so we're doing this work across the country, but we need funds to be able to be really effective. And so every dollar will be matched $1 to $1 up to $25,000. So if you can make a donation, no matter what size, we would really appreciate it. And then the second announcement that's super fun and exciting is that we are going to have a book club. a national book club on this book. And the first 10 people who signed up today will receive a free copy of the book. And the book club is on November 18th, and we hope that everyone can join us. That is the end of my announcements. And then just Katherine, it is such a pleasure to talk with you. You are inspiring all of us to take action, to talk to everyone in a very hopeful, wonderful way. We are so thankful for you being here. And thank you to everyone who joined us tonight, and have a wonderful evening.